My name is Alara Vance and I remember dying. The last sound I heard was not a gentle passing, but the raw, guttural scream of a man consumed by a hatred so profound it had become the very air he breathed. Cashin, my husband, the man who had once been as gentle as a spring morning, was shaking my lifeless body on the hospital bed. The fluorescent lights of the delivery room cast a sterile, cruel glow on his contorted face. Alara, you can't die. I haven't tormented you enough yet. What right do you have to die? His words were not a plea for my life, but a furious denial of my escape. I, a mere wandering soul, watched the scene unfold with a clarity that death had granted me. He truly hated me to the marrow of his bones. In that final, disorienting moment, a truth I had never known in life seared itself into my consciousness. The world I had lived in was a novel and I was the villainess. I was the wretched, spiteful character whose sole purpose was to stand between the hero, Cashin, and his one true love, the heroine, Sloane. I had been his childhood sweetheart, I had worn his ring, I had borne his name, but I had never, not for a single day, held his heart. I died desperately trying to give him an heir, a final, futile attempt to chain him to my side. And he hated me for it. A powerful, searing thought became my final prayer. If I were given another chance, I would never love him again. The moment the thought crystallized, a tremendous force pulled me away from the cold hospital room, through a vortex of light and sound, and then, silence. I opened my eyes to the soft morning light filtering through a canopy of white lace. The air smelled of lavender and old money. I was in my old bedroom at the Vance estate, the one my parents had decorated for their little princess. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stumbled out of bed and toward the full-length mirror. A young girl stared back at me. Her face was unlined, her eyes bright and clear, untouched by the years of grief and bitterness that had carved permanent tracks in my soul. Her skin glowed with health and youth. She was me, Alara Vance, at 17. I had been reborn 15 years in the past. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat, but it came out as a choked sob. My hands, smooth and unscarred, flew to my legs. I could feel the strong, supple muscles beneath the skin. They were whole. They were perfect. In my previous life, a freak accident with a stage light had crushed them during a university gala, ending my ballet career and trapping me in a body I saw as broken. It was the event that had cemented my dependence on Cashin, the beginning of my end. I now knew it was no accident. Sloane had orchestrated it, a perfectly timed ploy to get closer to Cashin that had gone wrong and landed on me instead. On my desk my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a single dreaded name. Cashin. For the first time in either of my lives, I did not feel that familiar, desperate lurch in my chest. I felt nothing but a cold, hollow calm. I let the call go to voicemail. My name is Alara Vance, the only daughter of the most powerful family in the city. I was cherished, adored, and destined from birth to marry Cashin Thorne, the heir to the Thorne Empire. Our families had it all planned out. Graduation, an opulent engagement ceremony, graduate school abroad, and finally, a merger in the form of a marriage that would solidify our family's dominance. Childhood sweethearts, a perfect match. We were supposed to be the golden couple, the envy of every socialite from here to New York. But then Sloane Mercer arrived on the first day of our freshman year at Blackwood University. She was a wildfire in human form, arriving on a roaring motorcycle, her chestnut hair cropped short, her clothes clinging to a frame that was both bold and fragile. She saw Cashin, knew he was mine, and decided she wanted him anyway. And he, the boy who had once kissed me under the glass roof of our greenhouse and told me my performance of The Dying Swan was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, began to waver. In this new precious life, Sloane appeared right on schedule. There she was, leaning against her motorcycle at the university gates, a smirk playing on her lips as she surveyed her new kingdom. The February air was biting, but she seemed immune to the cold. I felt Cashin tense beside me. I looked up at him, at the profile I had once traced with my fingertips, and a sudden, morbid curiosity seized me. Cashin, I asked, my voice deceptively light. Do you think she's pretty? In my first life, I had been too proud, too secure in our destiny, to ever ask such a needy question. Now I needed to hear his answer. Too garish, he replied almost without hesitation. I don't like that. Our friends, a flock of privileged heirs and heiresses, erupted in teasing. Oh, come on, Thorne. She's stunning, one of them laughed. Another, a girl named Chloe, nudged me. Don't worry, Alara. You're already the most beautiful one here. Cashin didn't refute it. He simply lifted the corner of his lips in that faint, enigmatic smile that I had once interpreted as secret pride. To our friends, it was a silent confirmation of my status. They whooped and hollered, "Look at him. He's so whipped. Alara, your face is all red." He ignored them, turning to me. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, his fingers barely grazing my cheek. I lowered my head on cue, playing the part of the blushing fiancé. I could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath his jacket, could hear the lively symphony of our friends' laughter. It was a picture of radiant, untouchable youth. But my own heart was a block of ice. Because in that fleeting moment when Sloane had laughed, throwing her head back, I had seen it. I had seen the trace of raw, captivated infatuation that flickered deep in Cashin's eyes. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, but I recognized it. I had only seen that look once before on my 16th birthday after I had danced for him. He was lying. To me, to our friends, perhaps even to himself. The pieces were falling into place exactly as they had before. Sloane would join the performance for the university's anniversary gala. Cashin would be a master of ceremonies. He would invite me to co-host as he always did. This time when he asked, I declined. I used the pressure of my studies as an excuse. My roommate, Maya, later told me that a freshman from the performing arts department had been chosen as the other MC. I merely smiled. Of course it was Sloane. She never missed an opportunity to get close to him. I didn't attend the gala. I didn't need to. With my eyes closed, I could name every program on that stage. The event was scheduled to end at 10:30 p.m. Maya returned to our dorm early, her face as pale as parchment. She sat down heavily on her bed, her hands trembling. "Alara, you won't believe it," she breathed, her eyes wide with shock. "There was an accident. A stage light fell. It hit Sloane Mercer. There was so much blood." I arranged my features into a mask of appropriate fear and concern, but inside I was calm. Calm to the point of cruelty. No one knew better than I the searing agony of having a metal light fixture crush your legs. Because in my previous life, the one lying in a pool of her own blood, her dreams shattered, had been me. And the person who had caused it all had been Sloane. She had timed it perfectly, planning for the light to fall near Cashin so she could stage a dramatic rescue and endear herself to him. But a previous act had run overtime, shifting the positions, and the light had found me instead. I had lain in the ICU for 2 days, clinging to life. My legs were left with permanent damage. I could never run, never jump, and I could certainly never dance again. The Black Swan performance at that gala had been my final dance. But in this life it was Sloane whose legs were broken. The script had been flipped. A few days later I went to visit her in the hospital. Accompanying me, his presence a dark cloud at my back, was Cashin. Standing at Sloane's bedside, I looked down at her pale, pained face and let a few perfectly timed tears fall. I repeated to her, word for word, the speech she had once given me in my past life. My voice was gentle, firm, and filled with a nauseating positivity. "Little sister, you must insist on rehabilitation. Even if you can never dance again, the future will still be bright and beautiful." Sloane's face turned a shade paler. She bit her lip so hard I thought it might bleed, and her sorrowful, soulful gaze immediately found Cashin, as if she had just taken a fatal blow directly to the heart. So, I thought, a vicious satisfaction curling in my stomach, she knows what heartbreak feels like too. I hadn't changed the script. I had simply swapped a single word. She had called me older sister, a patronizing term that had made my skin crawl. Now the tables were turned. Looking at her humiliated expression, I had to dig my nails deep into my palms to keep from laughing out loud. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Cashin frowning at me, his displeasure a tangible force. What now? I thought coldly. Was he finally starting to feel sorry for her? In my previous life, I never saw him show that kind of pity for me when I was the one in the hospital bed. Pretending not to notice his darkening mood, I turned and walked out of the room first. He followed me into the sterile white hallway. "You shouldn't have said that just now," he said, his voice low and tense. "Sloane will be hurt." Even now his first instinct was to shield her. A bitter smile threatened my lips, but I suppressed it. "Sloane isn't what she seems on the outside," I replied, my tone neutral. A strange, almost tender look flickered in his eyes. He was probably recalling the sight of Sloane gritting her teeth during her bandage changes, enduring the pain with a quiet resilience he found admirable. A girl like that he no doubt thought was rare nowadays. How ironic. In my past life, when I was the one in that bed, Sloane had visited me with flowers and crocodile tears, crying just in time for Cashin to walk in and witness her compassion. After she left, he had told me, "Sloane is really understanding, nothing like how she appears on the outside." He was already a senior. By all rights, he should have been preparing to hand over his position as student council president to a younger student. But in my first life he had clung to it stubbornly until graduation. It wasn't until much later that I understood why. Sloane was a member of the publicity department. If he stepped down, he would lose his legitimate reason to see her every day. Perhaps that was the moment I had truly begun to realize that his feelings for her were different. I looked at him now, this boy I had loved for a lifetime, and I felt nothing but a profound weariness. "Cashin," I said, my voice flat. "You're already a senior. Do you really still want to stay in the student council?" His eyes flickered with something, guilt, surprise, annoyance, before his expression hardened. His brows drew together, his displeasure written plainly across his handsome face. "Elara," he said, his voice cold, "you don't need to test me like that. I don't have any feelings for her beyond friendship." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, getting into his sleek black car and speeding away without a backward glance. As the taillights disappeared, I stood alone on the sidewalk. I lifted my head toward the misty gray sky and laughed. I laughed until tears streamed down my cheeks, hot and silent. I hadn't said much at all. I had only asked if he still wanted to stay on the council. Yet he had flown into a rage. That kind of guilty, defensive anger only meant one thing. In his heart he had already made his choice. Cashin was falling for Sloane Mercer all over again. And I, Elara Vance, who had clung to him with a desperate, pathetic fervor in my first life, finally had the clarity to let him go. The Cold War between Cashin and me stretched into a week. It was a familiar pattern, one established over years of our tumultuous relationship. In the past, I would have been the one to crack first. I would have shown up at his dorm with his favorite coffee, or sent a carefully worded text, or orchestrated a chance meeting. My entire existence had revolved around smoothing the wrinkles in our relationship, on ensuring the golden couple remained picture perfect. This time I did nothing. I asked my parents over a formal dinner, the crystal chandelier above our table casting a brilliant, cold light. "Mother, father," I began, my voice carefully measured. "If one day Cashin were to break off our engagement, would it disgrace the Vance family?" My father, Alistair Vance, a man with a presence as solid and imposing as an oak tree, set down his fork. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. His thick brows furrowed and his voice turned to ice. He wouldn't dare. Without the Vance family's support a generation ago, the Thorne Empire would be a fraction of what it is today. I lowered my head, sipping my soup to hide the bitter twist of my lips. My father didn't understand. No matter how great a debt of gratitude, it could never bind a person's heart for a lifetime. In my past life, when Cashin had tried to call off our engagement, I had refused to let go even if it meant death. The memory was a sharp, painful knot in my stomach. In a final dramatic act, Sloane had challenged me to a race, the winner claiming Cashin. I, prideful and desperate, had accepted. And in that race she had died. Her car had spun out of control, a fiery crash that extinguished her wild flame forever. From that day on, Cashin's hatred for me became a living, breathing entity. Even though his grandfather had forced him to marry me, our union was a hollow, miserable shell. He never allowed me a single day of peace. My mother, Eleanor, once told me that Cashin was the gentlest man of his generation, and that her daughter, graceful and well-mannered, would surely have a blissful life with him. But she never knew that the gentle boy she remembered had died with Sloane. The man who remained was cold, obsessive and cruel. He had turned against his own family, and after my parents and his grandfather passed, he had no restraints left. He vented all his hatred on me. He sold the ancestral Vance estate for a pittance and plotted to buy the cemetery where my parents were buried to build an amusement park over their graves. The memory was so vile, so gut-wrenching that a wave of nausea washed over me. My hands trembled, clenching the silver spoon until my knuckles were white. My father noticed. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice softening from its earlier steel. "Tell me, Has that Thorn boy been mistreating you? The concern in his voice, so genuine and fierce, was almost my undoing. My father, who loved me so deeply, was still here. But now I noticed the streaks of gray in his once jet-black hair. When had that happened? A lump formed in my throat, raw and burning. I forced it down, managing a faint, brittle smile. Dad, Cashin is very self-restrained. It's nothing. My father's gaze was sharp, missing nothing. He saw the tremor in my hand, the tension in my shoulders. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes dark with calculation. Sweetheart, he finally said, his voice stern. Endure a little longer. Once I secure this project the Vances are working on, our family will rise again. From then on, my daughter won't have to bow her head to anyone. At the mention of that project my blood ran cold. In my last life, it was that very venture that had marked the beginning of the Vance family's downfall. It had been a carefully laid trap, one that had bankrupted us and left us vulnerable to Cashin's subsequent attacks. I had to stop it, but I couldn't reveal my knowledge. Not yet. Our Cold War lasted 5 days. Our mutual friends noticed the tension and tried to drag us both out to one of our usual haunts to talk it out. We both politely declined, using schoolwork as an excuse. Then came Julian's birthday. Julian was one of our inner circle and his parties were legendary. Our families were too intertwined for me to refuse the invitation. By the time I arrived, the penthouse was pulsing with music and energy. And there, sitting in a wheelchair near the bar, was Sloane. In less than a week, she had already managed to wedge her way into this exclusive circle, her progress as rapid and invasive as a weed. The party games began, and as fate, or perhaps a rigged system, would have it, Sloane lost. Julian, ever the instigator, pulled one of his classic tricks. The penalty, he announced with a grin, is to choose a boy and play the lover's noodle game. The room erupted in cheers. Sloane, the picture of fragile beauty in her wheelchair, flushed a delicate pink. She clutched the armrests, her eyes downcast as if in deep, embarrassed thought. After a long, drawn-out moment of hesitation, she did exactly what she had done in my previous life. She raised a slender hand and pointed directly at Cashin. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed. I lowered my head and let out a quiet, humorless laugh. The lively atmosphere swallowed the sound. Cashin hesitated for a moment, not standing up right away. But then his eyes met Sloane's, which were glistening with unshed tears. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. They each took one end of a single strand of dry noodle. As they bit down and began to eat, the noodle shortened, drawing their faces closer and closer. The room was a cacophony of whistles and shouts. Their lips were a hair's breadth from touching when the noodle finally snapped. Everyone seemed to have forgotten that Cashin had a girlfriend. I was a ghost at my own funeral. I turned and left, my exit as silent as my arrival. One of the older women working the party, Julian's aunt from the countryside who he cherished deeply, saw me leaving. She looked deeply uncomfortable. "Miss Vance," she said cautiously, wringing her hands. "It's just the kids playing around." She was clearly worried I would lose my temper and cause a scene, ruining the young master's birthday. The Nashes wouldn't tolerate that. In my previous life I had done exactly that. I had stormed in, slapped Sloane, cursed out Julian, and shoved this very woman when she tried to intervene. That single act had shattered my relationship with Cashin beyond repair and had alienated Julian, whose family's vast network was crucial to the Thorn business. A week after that scandal, my father's guaranteed project had collapsed, and the Vance empire began to crumble. This time I simply smiled. It was a calm, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. I handed my gift to the anxious aunt. "Please give this to Julian for me." "Thank you." Then I turned and walked away as if I had never been there at all. The next day Julian came to find me on campus. We met at a cafe just off university grounds. He had arrived early and had already ordered me a Sakura latte, my favorite. He thanked me for the gift and then carefully broached the subject. "Elara, I'm sorry," he said, his handsome face uncharacteristically serious. "We drank a bit too much last night. Don't take it to heart, okay?" Clearly, his aunt had told him I had witnessed the entire spectacle. "It's fine," I said with a gentle shake of my head, my smile perfectly in place. He let out a visible sigh of relief. "Good. As long as you understand. Cashin has his limits." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Anyway, I heard from my dad that your future grandfather-in-law had tea with Cashin recently. They've already discussed coming to your house after graduation to settle the engagement. That should be soon, right? Soon, I echoed. If the timeline held, it would be next month. But in this life there would be no engagement. I blinked, feigning ignorance. Is that so? The truth is, I think Cashin and I are still young. There's no need to rush. I stirred my latte thoughtfully. To be honest, we're both from prominent families. If it's not Cashin, it'll just be someone else among the city's elite heirs. Nothing is ever set in stone. Julian froze for a second, then lifted his gaze to me. His eyes, the color of warm honey, seemed to search mine. That's not what you used to say, he murmured. Back then, when I confessed to you after middle school graduation, you told me you only liked him and no one else. A wave of nostalgia for a simpler, more foolish time washed over me. Youthful ignorance, I said with a soft laugh. I once thought liking someone meant it would last a lifetime. But love can't be measured by time. A lifetime is far too long, and liking only one person seems rather dull. What about now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I quietly placed my hand over his on the table. His whole body went still. Julian, I began, my voice soft and laced with a vulnerability I was carefully projecting. If one day Cashin and I really fall apart, you'll help me, won't you? His whole body trembled. His ears flushed a bright, telling red. He clasped my hand with his free one, his grip firm and warm, but only for a brief, electric moment before letting go. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze intense and unwavering. Of course. The word was a vow. His gaze lingered on our hands before he looked back at me, his lips pressing into a firm line. Alara, even if you didn't ask me like this, I and the entire Nash family behind me would still stand on your side. Julian Nash had liked me since we were children. I had never felt my heart stir for him, always seeing him as just a friend. After his confession, I had avoided him, and he had eventually become close friends with Cashin instead. In my past life, when I had shoved his aunt, he had been rightfully furious. But later, when he saw how miserably Cashin and Sloane treated me, he had come to me, asking me to break it off and consider him instead. I, consumed by my rivalry and my pride, had rejected him. I thought he was just like me, coveting what he couldn't have. He never dated anyone else. Later, I learned that when the Vances were being crushed by the thorns, he had secretly helped me many times behind his father's back. The day I died, he was overseas. The moment he stepped out of a meeting and heard the news, he had vomited blood and rushed to book a flight home. The plane he boarded crashed on the way. My eyes stung, my vision blurring at the memory. Looking at the boy in front of me, his face flushed with a hopeful, earnest embarrassment, a pang of genuine sorrow and guilt rose in my chest. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick. When he saw my tears, he panicked. Alara, don't cry. Please don't cry. Don't worry. I'll definitely stand by you. He lifted his chin with a confident grin, trying to lighten the mood. My father has a reputation for being a romantic, but he always listens to me. I'll convince him to help you. The corners of his lips curved into a smile, and his eyes glittered as though they held the whole galaxy. That was what I wanted, his promise. In this city, everyone knew. Once a man of the Nash family gave his word, he would see it through to the end. I'm sorry, Julian, I thought, my heart aching with a strange mix of manipulation and genuine affection. Let me use you this once. In return, I swear I'll change your fate. I tugged lightly at his sleeve and curved my lips into a gentle, grateful smile. You should go now. And don't let anyone know about today. He brushed a lock of hair from my cheek, his touch lingering for a heartbeat, and grinned brightly. I understand. I watched his car disappear around the corner. Then I walked a few steps toward a parked black sedan and used its tinted window as a mirror. My eyes were slightly red, the tip of my nose flushed a delicate pink. I looked obedient, vulnerable. Pitiful even. It was an expression I had once despised on Sloane. I never expected that in this life I would learn to wield it so effectively. I quickly erased the pitiful look, restoring my face to its usual calm mask, and walked toward the school gates. I didn't know it then, but inside that very black sedan, Cashin's assistant was sitting in the driver's seat, not daring to speak. And in the back, Cashin's dark, furious gaze was fixed on the spot where Julian and I had just said our goodbyes. He had seen everything. The air in the cafe had been thick with unspoken promises, but the air around me now felt charged with a different energy, a silent, watching presence. I didn't see him, but I felt Cashin's eyes on me as I walked back to my dorm, the ghost of Julian's touch still warm on my sleeve. A part of me, the old Alara, would have been frantic, worried about his anger, his misinterpretation. The new Alara felt a grim satisfaction. Let him watch. Let him see that I was no longer waiting patiently by the phone. The rumors began to swirl a few days later, as I knew they would. Whispers that Cashin, a senior, had been seen driving to pick up a freshman girl. The girl, of course, was Sloane. My well-meaning friend Maya came to me with wide, worried eyes, clutching her tablet with the blurry photo evidence. Alara, have you seen this? It's all over the forums. Are you okay? I looked up from my textbook, my expression perfectly serene. I trust Cashin isn't that kind of person, I said, my voice calm and measured. Sloane. I haven't interacted with her much, but I've heard from others she has a good personality, even if she seems a little hard to approach. I repeated the very words she had once used to damn me with false praise. Maya stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She hesitated, then finally just shook her head and walked away, muttering about my unbelievable composure. Not long after, a new, more insidious rumor spread, that Sloane and I were best friends, and that Cashin was only giving her rides at my benevolent request. When Maya saw that piece of gossip, she cursed under her breath. Who the hell would want to be friends with someone like her? I didn't have to guess the source. It was classic Sloane. She wanted to steal my fiancé, use my name to climb the social ladder, win sympathy for her friendship with the betrayed girlfriend, and still play the pure, innocent heroine. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. A week after Julian's birthday, the dam broke. Someone posted the full, clear video of the lovers' noodle game on the university's main forum. It wasn't me. I had learned the value of plausible deniability. Overnight, the campus sentiment shifted. The looks I received were no longer just pity. They were filled with sympathetic outrage. I had become the wronged woman, graceful in my silence. In my past life, when a similar video had surfaced, Cashin had told me it was just a game, that I was overreacting. But was it? Was the intimate, breathless proximity, the collective cheer of our peers, the sheer public nature of the betrayal really just a game? I decided to stoke the flames just a little. I grabbed Maya and a pile of expensive snacks and headed to the student council office under the guise of a friendly visit. A couple of starstruck underclassmen helped us carry everything up. Just as we reached the door, we heard voices from within Cashin's office. Out of everyone that night, you're the only one I know, Sloane's soft, trembling voice floated out. I didn't expect people to misunderstand like this. I was planning to go to Alara's dorm later to explain and then clarify things on the forum. I held my breath, listening. Cashin's voice, when it came, was cool and detached. No need. Just let them say what they want. There was a pause. Then Sloane's voice, thick with manufactured tears. I'm sorry. I didn't know you had a girlfriend. That was Maya's breaking point. With a furious grunt, she shoved the snacks into a bystander's arms and kicked the door open with a resounding bang. She marched straight in, pointing a finger at a startled Sloane. Are you kidding me? Who in this entire school doesn't know Alara and Cashin are a couple? They're literally the top ship on the forum last year. They even filmed the admissions video together holding hands. Maybe you can't see, but don't you at least have ears? Her voice rose with each word, drawing a crowd of student council members. At the anniversary gala when Cashin was on stage, how many girls screamed Alara's name until their throats were raw? Were you deaf then? Even if you're blind and deaf, before cozying up to someone, shouldn't you at least ask, do you have a girlfriend? Laughter and murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Their eyes on Sloane were now filled with open disdain. Exposed and humiliated, Sloane's face turned a blotchy red. Her eyes, wide and pleading, instantly sought out Cashin. But Cashin's gaze was locked on me, standing in the doorway. Why are you here today? He asked, his voice flat. Not yesterday, not the day before, but today. The day the video was posted. He thought I had come to cause a scene, to confront him at his most vulnerable moment. I saw a flicker of smug satisfaction in Sloane's eyes. She thought she had won, that his attention was on defending their innocent relationship from his jealous harpy of a girlfriend. I lowered my head, my shoulders trembling. But it wasn't from tears. It was from the sheer effort of suppressing my laughter. When I finally looked up, I made sure my voice was laced with a delicate, wounded tremor. Can't I come? To the crowd, I was a portrait of devastation, wounded to my very core. They saw a fiancée pushed too far, her love met with public betrayal and cold indifference. Even Cashin seemed taken aback by my display of vulnerability. He was used to my fiery temper, my sharp words. He didn't know how to handle this quiet, broken version of me. But I had no interest in his reaction. My little performance was almost over. The eye drops I'd used were starting to wear off. "I'm leaving," I whispered, biting my lip and casting him one last heartbroken glance. A single, perfectly timed tear traced a path down my cheek. I turned to go, but a member of the council, a girl I barely knew, stopped me. "Alara, don't go. The one who should leave isn't you." "Exactly," another voice chimed in. "Some people are just too much. Who does she think she is? Disgusting." The murmurs of support for me and condemnation for Sloane grew into a dull roar. Sloane's chest heaved with rage. She jumped up from her seat, her fists clenched, the fragile act completely shattered. "Alara Vance, stop right there. What are you pretending to be so pitiful for? You're the one who posted that video on the forum, aren't you? Last time you came to the hospital just to mock me for getting hurt, and now you show up here putting on this act. For who?" I almost laughed aloud. This was the line. The very line I had screamed at her in my previous life in a similar, yet reversed, scenario. Back then I had been the one storming in, wild with jealousy, while she clung to Cashin, crying pearly tears. I had been the villain. Now the roles were perfectly, beautifully inverted. "Are you crazy?" Maya shot back before I could even open my mouth. "Who would post such an embarrassing video of themselves online? What are you, a dog? Biting anyone who gets close?" Another council member sneered. I simply tugged on Maya's arm and led her out, Sloane's tear-choked voice following us down the hall. "What are you all doing? Why is everyone treating me this way? I didn't do anything wrong." Once we were outside, Maya was still fuming. "That trash. I really want to slap her." I patted her shoulder, a genuine relaxed smile finally gracing my lips. "Let her be. She'll calm down." We stepped out into the afternoon sun. A soft breeze stirred, and the light spilled across the university's ancient eaves. I lifted my head to the deep blue sky and smiled, feeling a weight I had carried for a lifetime begin to lift. Dora frowned, baffled. "How can you still smile after all that?" "Because I've already won," I said softly. From the moment I visited her in the hospital, I had been deliberately provoking her. The art of war said, if you can anger your enemy, you'll find their weakness. In my past life, she had provoked me, made me lose my composure, and I had stumbled into every trap. This time I had struck first. I had made her lose control in front of everyone. I had won this round. And I intended to keep winning. Unbeknownst to me, inside his office, Cashin felt a violent, inexplicable lurch in his chest. He straightened up, a sudden urgent need to chase after me seizing him. But Sloane grabbed his hand, her tears soaking through his sleeve. "Cashin, please say something for me. I didn't mean it." He looked down at her tear-streaked face, and for a reason he couldn't fathom, a sharp, twisting pain gripped his stomach, so intense it stole his breath. Cashin was taken to the hospital. Acute gastritis brought on by stress, the doctor said. He posted a short, vague status update, and our circle of friends descended upon his private room immediately, a flock of brightly plumaged birds bringing noise and expensive get-well gifts. But when they arrived, they found only Cashin, pale and irritable in his bed, and Sloane, perched dutifully in the chair beside him, pouring him a glass of water with a solicitous air. The room, which had been buzzing with chatter, fell into an awkward silence. Everyone's eyes flickered between the empty doorway and Sloane. The unspoken question hung in the air. "Where is Alara?" They laughed and joked, trying to lighten the mood, but Cashin's eyes kept darting past them toward the door. A faint, unmistakable trace of disappointment flashed in his gaze. "Is it just you guys?" he finally asked, his voice rough. The group fell silent. Among his closest friends, only two were missing. Me and Julian. "Well, with her here," one of the boys said, gesturing vaguely at Sloane, "of course it wouldn't be convenient for Alara to come." Someone else, trying to change the subject, piped up. "And Julian's been really busy lately. Even when we asked him out, he always says he's busy." "Busy?" Cashin's voice was a low growl. "What else would he be busy with?" The tension in the room was suddenly suffocating. The boy who had spoken shrugged, a nervous laugh escaping him. Dating, obviously. Damn couple. The words hung in the air. Damn couple. He meant me and Julian. Cashin's expression darkened, his jaw tightening so much I'm surprised his teeth didn't crack. The room fell into a terrified hush. Only Sloane had the nerve to move, pouring him a fresh glass of water with a trembling hand. He accepted it, his knuckles white around the glass, then coldly pointed at one of his lackeys. Call Julian. The boy fumbled with his phone, dialing the number and switching to speakerphone as ordered. The call connected, and from the other end came the sound of heavy, ragged breathing, the kind that was immediately intimately suggestive. With a furious, guttural roar, Cashin hurled the glass across the room. It shattered against the wall, water and shards of crystal exploding everywhere. Sloane let out a sharp cry, jumping back in terror. Nobody understood the depth of his rage, but the room was frozen in fear. The only sound was the continued, panting breaths coming from the phone. Julian. Cashin roared into the speaker. What the hell are you doing? Who's with you? There was a beep, the sound of a machine slowing down, followed by Julian's low, slightly breathless chuckle. Why are you freaking out, man? I was just running. On a treadmill. Who do you think is with me? He paused, and his next words were lazy, yet every syllable was a deliberate precision strike. At this hour, the girl panting beside me. Want to guess who she is? The others in the room exchanged wide-eyed glances. The implication was clear. They were starting to piece it together. Cashin's irrational anger wasn't just about the forum post or Sloane. It was about me. By the next morning, the story had mutated and spread through our social circle like a virus. Shameless Sloane, the sly homewrecker. And Cashin's no better, flaunting his mistress. Poor Ilara. Both their reputations were in tatters. And I, the victim, seemed to have entered a phase of graceful acceptance. The fact that Julian, the heartthrob of the neighboring university, was now a constant presence by my side did not go unnoticed. Cashin, fuming in his hospital bed, ordered one of his friends to call me. The boy clearly didn't want to be involved, but under the force of Cashin's icy glare he complied. The phone rang and then connected. "What's up?" came a man's voice. The air in the hospital room froze solid. It was Julian's voice. Cashin's lips twitched, his eyes blazing with a terrifying fire. "Julian," he snarled, his voice dangerously low. "Why the hell does Ilara's phone end up with you?" On the other end, Julian laughed, a warm, genuine sound that was a direct insult to Cashin's fury. "Cashin, it's not just her phone. She's here with me too." The vein in Cashin's forehead bulged. He snatched the phone from his friend's hand and smashed it against the wall with a final, destructive crunch. Lately, Julian had been coming to find me every few days. As a student from another university, he often came over to use our basketball courts. He developed a new habit of stopping mid-game, jogging over to where I sat reading under a tree and demanding I bring him water. "You're 20 minutes later than yesterday," I teased one afternoon, handing him a bottle of cold water. Dressed in a loose, dark blue jersey, his hair damp with sweat, he grinned at me. "Got held up by adoring fans," he joked, his chest still heaving. He took the bottle but then made a show of wrinkling his nose. "Actually," he said, his tone turning wheedling, "I don't want this. Can you make me some of that chrysanthemum tea? The one you brought last time? It's better for my health." I couldn't help but laugh. The hot water dispenser in my dorm was broken, and I'd had to borrow a kettle from the stern dorm manager. All because this spoiled young master had a sudden preference for herbal tea. I handed him my thermos with a little smile. The hot water dispenser broke. "This is all I have." He gave a soft grunt of acknowledgement, but then bent down, picked up a bottle of mineral water from the ground, unscrewed the cap and handed it to me first. Then he poured some into the thermos cup, diluting the strong tea I'd made before lifting it and drinking it in one long, thirsty gulp. I watched the sweat soak through the back of his jersey, the logo rising and falling with his powerful breaths. The sunset slanted across his profile, etching out the sharp, distinct lines of his jaw. The court was full of athletic men, but Julian stood out. There was a raw, effortless vitality to him that was impossible to ignore. My gaze lingered near the open collar of his jersey before I quickly, guiltily looked away. Not even a few seconds passed before a large, warm hand gently turned my face back toward him. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He lowered his head, his droopy lids and slightly pouting lips giving him the air of a pitiful, scolded puppy. What are you looking at so strangely? Is he better looking than me? The question was so absurd, so utterly juvenile that I couldn't help it. I reached up and ruffled his damp hair. It was softer than I expected. His face instantly turned a deep, crimson red. He rasped out in a small, angry voice, "What are you doing? You can't just pat a guy's head like that." "Oh, oops." I laughed, covering my mouth. "Sorry, I'll do it again next time." "Forget it," he muttered, draining the rest of his cup in one go, his ears still blazing. Then he grabbed my thermos in one hand and my wrist in the other. His grip was firm, his skin warm against mine. "I'm starving. Buy me dinner." "I should at least treat you once," I said softly, allowing him to pull me to my feet. "After all, I owe you a huge favor." He grinned, a brilliant sun-catching smile that made my heart do a funny little flip. "Okay." Just as I was about to stand fully, a basketball came hurtling out of nowhere, straight at my head. My body froze, trapped in the memory of 100 other projectiles Cashin had thrown in fits of anger. But in the blink of an eye, a dark figure shot in front of me. A large hand smacked the ball away with a loud, sharp crack, sending it flying back in the direction it came from. Julian yanked me firmly behind his back, his body a solid, protective wall. "Cashin," he shouted furiously, his voice echoing across the now silent court. "Are you insane?" I hadn't even seen him arrive. He wasn't in sportswear, just a simple jacket and sweatpants, as if he'd come straight from class. His lips were pressed into a thin, white line, his gaze fixed on Julian with a possessive fury that made my blood run cold. "Sorry," he said flatly, the word utterly devoid of remorse. "Slipped." The air crackled with tension. I tugged lightly on Julian's sleeve. "I'm hungry," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's go." He glanced down at me, his anger momentarily shifting to concern. He paused for a second, then his lips curled into a smirk. "What do you want to eat? You really treating me?" Forget it. I can't swallow food if a girl's paying." Under the deepening twilight, we walked side by side out of the court, not sparing Cashin a single glance. I could feel his gaze burning into my back, a tangible force of hatred and desperation. He stood frozen, the world moving around him in a blur, while the two of us, our shoulders nearly touching, walked away from him without a backward glance. The sunset stretched his shadow out long and lonely behind him. And maybe he didn't even realize that the fingers hanging at his sides were trembling. The silence that followed our exit from the basketball court was more deafening than any shout. I didn't look back, but I could feel the weight of Cashin's stare, a physical pressure between my shoulder blades. Julian's hand was still wrapped around my wrist, his grip firm and grounding. He didn't let go until we were off campus and tucked into a booth at a quiet, dimly lit izakaya, the scent of grilling meat and soy sauce a comforting blanket around us. "He's losing it," Julian said finally, his voice low as he poured me a cup of green tea. His earlier playfulness was gone, replaced by a serious intensity. "That wasn't an accident, Alara. He aimed for you." "I know," I said, my voice quiet. My hands were steady as I lifted the cup. The initial shock had faded, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. The Cashin of this timeline was unraveling faster than he had in the previous life. My indifference, my alliance with Julian, it was pushing him off the script he knew, and he didn't know how to handle it. Later that night, as I was washing my hair, my phone buzzed on the sink. I watched it ring, the vibrations skittering the phone across the marble surface. I made no move to answer it. By the time I had dried my hands, the screen was dark. I didn't call back. The next day he found me. I was in a giant, packed lecture hall for an economics class that ran from afternoon into evening. A whisper rustled through the rows, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned slightly, and there he was, sliding into the empty seat beside me as if he belonged there. He carried a textbook he had no need for, his posture rigid. A few rows ahead, I saw someone sneakily raise their phone to take a picture. My nerves tightened. This was a public declaration, a claim staked in front of hundreds of witnesses. According to the storyline, he should have been wrapped up in comforting a distressed Sloane. Why was he here? "What are you doing here?" I whispered, my voice tight as I tilted my head toward him, keeping my eyes fixed on the professor. Studying with you, he answered without looking at me, ignoring the stares from all around. His gaze stayed fixed on the unopened book. The audacity was breathtaking. With the kind of relationship we have now, I said, my voice dropping even lower, there's no need for you to act like this. Everyone already knows we're no longer on speaking terms. He finally turned his head, his eyes boring into mine. They were dark, unreadable pools. What kind of relationship do we have, Alara? He murmured. If I remember correctly, you're still my girlfriend. A cold laugh escaped me. Funny how when you were playing that noodle game with Sloane, you didn't seem to remember that at all. I leaned closer, my words for his ears only. Cashin, we broke up a long time ago. Really? He murmured, flipping a page in his book with a deliberate slowness. I don't recall that happening. Frustration, sharp and hot, flared in my chest. This was the infuriating, arrogant certainty I remembered from our marriage. The assumption that I would always be there, that my feelings were irrelevant to the fact of our bond. Fine, I hissed, my composure cracking. Then let's make it official now. We're done. Remember it this time. He closed the book with a definitive snap and looked at me fully, his gaze shadowed with a gloom that felt ancient. All I remember is this, he said, his voice low and intense. The Thorne and Vance families arranged our engagement since childhood. That engagement wasn't something a simple breakup between us could undo. He stood to leave as the lecture ended, the students around us erupting into noise and movement. Before he melted into the crowd, he turned back, his words a quiet command that sent a chill down my spine. Grandfather wants you to come over for Sunday dinner. The Thorne family dinner. In my past life, it was at that very dinner that his grandfather had asked me if I thought the engagement the following month was too soon. Back then, drowning in my rivalry with Sloane, I had seized the opportunity. I had told his grandfather everything, pouring out my grievances, exposing Cashin's affair with a common girl. The old man, who placed immense value on family background, had struck Cashin across the face and threatened to have Sloane disciplined. Under that pressure, Cashin had reluctantly agreed to the engagement, only to sabotage it later by deliberately landing himself in the hospital on the eve of the ceremony. This time I had already decided. I would refuse. I went to the dinner with my parents. The Thorne mansion was as opulent and intimidating as I remembered, a monument to old money and cold ambition. Cashin's grandfather, Alistair Thorne, was a man carved from granite, his eyes missing nothing. The conversation was stilted, revolving around business and politics, until the main course was cleared. Then the old man fixed his gaze on me. Alara, my dear, he began, his voice like gravel. Your graduation is approaching. Your father and I have been discussing the engagement. I thought next month. Before he could finish, before I could even open my mouth to deliver my carefully rehearsed refusal, Cashin interrupted. Grandfather, he said, his voice smooth as silk. He didn't look at me. Alara won't mind. We've been together long enough. The air left my lungs. He was preempting me. He was so arrogantly sure that I would still go along with it, that my recent behavior was just a temporary tantrum. He was trying to force my hand, to trap me back into my old role in front of both our families. I saw my father, Alistair Vance, stiffen beside me. He knew about Sloane. I had told them everything before we came. His eyes, usually warm when they looked at me, burned with a cold fury as he stared at Cashin, who sat sipping his wine as if he hadn't just tried to auction off my future without my consent. My father placed his napkin on the table with a quiet, final precision. There's no need to bring up the engagement for now, he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Alara is still young. Her mother and I want to keep her with us a few more years. He turned his steely gaze toward Cashin's grandfather. Times are different now, Alistair. Old notions about family background aren't as important anymore. Then he looked directly at Cashin, and his next words were a deliberate, calculated blow. If Cashin truly likes that girl, then he should bring her home and let you meet her. I hadn't expected my father to be so direct. The shock that rippled through the room was palpable. Cashin's head snapped up, but he didn't look at his grandfather. He turned to me, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The arrogance had finally cracked. He couldn't believe I had told my parents. He thought our drama was a private game, that when it came down to the business of marriage I would still fall in line because I loved him too much to truly let him go. He was far, far too confident. The expression on Alistair Thorne's face darkened into a thundercloud. The planned engagement was shattered, not by my refusal, but by my father's protective, furious shield. The old man's pride was wounded. The dinner ended in a frosty, formal silence. That night, back in the safety of my room, I picked up my phone. I navigated to my social media account and posted a single simple line of text. Once I wished for us, now I wish you well. It was vague, poetic, and utterly damning. My inbox immediately flooded with messages from our circle. What happened? Are you okay? I replied to only one with a single stoic sentence. We broke up. The deeper reasons didn't need explaining. Everyone already knew about Cashin and Sloane. Ilara Vance had done nothing wrong. I was the perfect victim, dignified, graceful, and finally free. The post received only one public like. It came from Julian. At midnight my phone buzzed. It was him. "Come downstairs," was all he said. I didn't hesitate. I slipped into a simple but elegant dress, the midnight blue fabric soft against my skin, and quietly ran down the stairs, avoiding the creaky steps. His car was idling at the curb, a low, dark shape in the sleeping night. I slipped into the passenger seat. The air conditioning was on, a welcome relief from the stifling summer heat. His face was flushed and he handed me a thin cashmere blanket. "It's about an hour and a half drive. Get some sleep," he said, his voice a little rough. I accepted the blanket, studying him in the dim light of the dashboard. "Why is your face so red?" "No reason. Really." I leaned closer, blinking playfully. "Let me see." He pressed his lips together, his face turning an even deeper shade of red as he leaned toward me, a silent, nervous invitation. The space between us vanished. In that instant our lips met. It wasn't planned. It wasn't a strategy. It was soft, tentative, and then as he responded with a sudden, hungry intensity, it was everything. The warmth, the softness, the faint taste of mint in him. It was perfect. "Sorry," he whispered against my lips, his breath warm. "I didn't pull away. Just once." I breathed, my own voice barely a whisper. "Don't you want more?" His gaze deepened, the corners of his eyes tinged a vulnerable pink. My heart hammered against my ribs. Instinctively, I licked my lips and his breath hitched. His mouth was hot, his body firm and strong where my hands rested on his chest. Every touch, every shift sent tingling waves through me, erasing the memory of every cold, dutiful kiss I had ever shared with Cashin. At that very moment, as we finally broke apart, breathless, the horizon began to lighten. We had driven to a cliffside overlook. A burst of fireworks, some distant early morning celebration, lit up the sky in a shower of brilliant color, painting his face in gold and crimson. I sank into the dazzling display, into the feeling of his arm around me. The sunrise that followed was the most beautiful I had ever seen, a slow, burning wash of orange and pink over the waking world. As the sun broke fully over the horizon, Julian lifted his phone and snapped a picture of me, my profile silhouetted against the dawn, a small, genuine smile on my lips. He posted it with a single, unequivocal caption. "My love." The digital world exploded. The comments flooded in. "Oh my God, are you two official now? This early in the morning? Did you spend the night together? Zoom in. Zoom in again. There's a mark on Ilara's neck." I leaned my head against Julian's shoulder as he scrolled through the comments, laughing, a low, happy sound rumbling in his chest. Being claimed like this, openly and proudly, was something I had never experienced with Cashin. I watched him reply to a comment with a pride that made my heart swell. Opportunities like this don't come often. Of course, I had to lock it down early. I turned my head, watching him smirk at the screen, looking unbearably, wonderfully smug. The sunlight poured across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the curve of his smile. He was so beautiful it stole my breath. After staying awake nearly the whole night, I finally slept through the entire morning, the scent of Julian's cologne and the memory of the sunrise clinging to me like a happy dream. I was woken by the sound of pouring rain and a flustered maid knocking on my door. "Miss Vance," she said, her face pale. "Young Master Thorne has been here since early this morning. He's in the sitting room. Please be careful. There's something strange about him." The dream shattered. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. The moment I saw him, I understood what she meant. Cashin sat on the antique velvet sofa, soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. But it was his eyes that stopped me dead. In just one night he seemed to have aged a decade. The youthful arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out darkness. When he heard me enter he lifted his head. His eyes, once cold but familiar, were now black and bottomless, like two endless pits of pure, consuming obsession. They were the eyes of the man who had shaken my lifeless body. The man from 15 years in the future. My heart stopped, then slammed against my ribs. The truth was a cold, hard stone in my gut. Cashin had been reborn too. The air in the sitting room was thick with the smell of damp wool and madness. Cashin's gaze was a physical weight, and when it landed on the faint, purpling mark at the base of my neck, Julian's mark, the last vestiges of sanity in his eyes shattered. They flooded with a furious, crimson rage. A terrible, primal fear, one I knew intimately from my first life, seized me. This was it. The moment the story could revert to its tragic, violent end. Elara Vance. He breathed, his voice a low, guttural thing that was barely human. Who gave you permission to be with Julian? He was on me before I could blink, moving with a speed that was terrifying. His hands, cold from the rain, clamped around my throat like iron manacles. I clawed at his wrists, my nails digging into his skin, but it was useless. The difference in strength was absolute, a brutal reminder of my physical vulnerability. The air was choked from my lungs, spots dancing before my eyes. I saw the maid rush forward, screaming, trying to pull him away. He shoved her aside with one arm without even looking, his entire being focused on extinguishing the life from me. Elara, he snarled, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and frantic. You are mine. In our past life, in this one too. Don't you even think about leaving me. The confirmation, the use of that old, hated name from the novel's narrative, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. His bloodshot eyes were wild, completely unhinged. My chest burned, a fire spreading through my lungs as oxygen fled. My vision began to tunnel, the edges turning black. Is this it? I thought, despair washing over me. Even reborn, am I still destined to die at his hands? Suddenly, the crushing weight at my throat vanished. I collapsed to the Persian rug, gasping, my throat on fire. Through blurred vision, I saw another figure, a blur of motion and fury, tackling Cashin to the ground. Julian. He moved with a ferocity I had never seen, pinning Cashin down, his fist connecting with Cashin's jaw with a sickening crack. Don't you ever touch her, he roared. Stop. I croaked, my voice a ragged whisper. Julian, don't. Call the police. The authorities arrived with shocking speed. The Vance estate had state-of-the-art security, and the surveillance cameras in the sitting room had recorded everything in chilling high definition. Cashin's actions were unequivocal, intentional assault. The evidence was irrefutable. Because my physical injuries weren't life-threatening, though the bruises around my throat were a lurid, damning purple. And given his family's influence, his sentence wasn't decades. But it was enough. 1.5 years in a white-collar prison. For a scion of the Thorn Empire, it was a death sentence of a different kind. Cashin might have been brilliant, but the Thorns had more than one heir. They would never, ever allow someone with a criminal record, a record of violently attacking the daughter of their most powerful ally, no less, to inherit the empire. From the moment the judge's gavel fell, Cashin Thorn was irrevocably cut off from the line of succession. His future, the future he had killed me for in another life, was ashes. In the wake of the scandal, I had someone discreetly keep an eye on Sloane. The reports that came back were grimly satisfying. Unmoored by Cashin's downfall and desperate to maintain her foothold in the world of luxury she craved, she had quickly become entangled with another wealthy heir in our circle, a boy named Marcus. But Marcus was different. He was kind, perhaps a little naive, and he didn't possess the same dark, obsessive passion Cashin had for her. He cared for her sincerely at first, but he wasn't the type to let a romance derail his studies or defy his family. Her neediness, her dramatic scenes, her constant demands for proof of his love, began to wear on him. He started to pull away. Sloane, unable to accept the loss of another meal ticket, showed up at his family's estate, causing a hysterical scene at the gates. She was publicly, humiliatingly, turned away by the security staff. On her way home, distraught and reckless, her car spun out on a rain-slicked road. The accident was severe. In the end, she still reached the same fate as in my past life. A bitter irony settled in my stomach. She could have chosen a different path, walked away, started over. But she hadn't been reborn. She didn't know this world was a novel, that she was the tragic heroine. Or perhaps in this new rewritten story, the threads of fate were just too strong. Maybe everything had already shifted into a new narrative altogether, one where the villainess and the heroine could both find peace, but she had chosen the same destructive patterns. But so what? In a world where reality and fiction had blurred beyond recognition, who could ever know what the true ending was supposed to be? Julian's sunrise post, his public claim of me, hadn't been hidden from the adults. Both the Nash and Vance families saw it. A week after the dust from Cashin's sentencing began to settle, our families formally sat down to discuss our engagement. Sitting in my father's study with Julian beaming beside me and his father, a serious but kind-eyed man, nodding in approval, it felt surreal. This was the path that had always been available, the one I had been too blind and stubborn to see. Julian, however, grumbled under his breath, clearly dissatisfied as the lawyers discussed timelines. "Why can't we just get married right away?" he whispered, lacing his fingers through mine. I shot him a sharp warning look and he immediately shut his mouth, though a petulant pout remained. He was like an overeager puppy and I couldn't help the fond smile that tugged at my lips. The day after our engagement ceremony, a quieter, more genuine affair than the spectacle my first engagement to Cashin would have been, Julian and I left the country. Both families accompanied us to the airport, a send-off filled with real warmth and hope. He held my hand tightly as we walked through security together, his thumb stroking reassuring circles over my knuckles. The moment I sat down in the first-class cabin, the hum of the jet engines a soothing vibration, I truly felt it. It was a physical sensation, like a heavy, rusted chain that had been wrapped around my soul for a lifetime had finally, audibly, snapped and fallen away. I leaned my head against the window, watching the ground crew below. I didn't know how long I would live in this second chance. But I knew this. The stubbornness, the desperation, the bitter unwillingness to let go that had defined my first life had finally left me. The ghost of Alara Vance had been laid to rest. Only by daring to face adversity head-on, by finally letting go of the script, had my life truly begun to change. The plane lifted into the air, climbing above the clouds into the brilliant, endless blue. Julian's hand found mine again, his grip sure and steady. I didn't look back. The world from above was a clean slate. Endless blue and blinding white, untethered from the gravity of my past. For the first time in 2 lifetimes I was breathing free air. Julian, sensing the shift in me, didn't fill the silence with chatter. He simply held my hand, his presence a steady, warm anchor in the vastness. We traveled without a fixed itinerary. We wandered through cobblestone streets in Italy, where the sun was warm and the language was music. We got lost in the neon-drenched alleys of Tokyo, sharing bowls of ramen under vibrant signs. We hiked trails in Norway where the fjords were so majestic they made my heart ache. In these places, so far removed from the gilded cages of our social circle, I wasn't Alara Vance, the betrayed fiancée or the vengeful reborn soul. I was just Alara. And Julian wasn't the Nash heir performing a role. He was just Julian, the man who made me laugh, who looked at me as if I'd hung the moon, and who never once mentioned Cashin's name. The news from home trickled in via sparse, carefully worded emails from my father. The Thorne family, in a desperate bid to salvage their reputation, had publicly disowned Cashin, transferring all inheritance rights to a distant cousin. The Vance family, with the Nanhees' unwavering support, had not only secured the project that once doomed us but had expanded it, our family's influence rising to heights my father had only dreamed of. The world we left behind was reorganizing itself, closing the wounds we had inflicted and moving on. One rainy afternoon in a cozy London bookstore, tucked away in a worn leather armchair, I found myself finally able to think of Cashin without a phantom hand tightening around my throat. He was a closed chapter, a tragic figure trapped in a narrative of his own making, both in the novel and now in reality. His rebirth had not been his salvation. It had been his final damnation, locking him into an obsession he could never escape. I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but a profound, weary understanding. Then I let it go, the last vestige of him drifting away like smoke. Julian, who had been browsing the poetry section, came over and knelt beside my chair, resting his head on my knee. "You look peaceful," he murmured, his eyes soft. I am, I said, and for the first time I knew it was the absolute truth. I ran my fingers through his hair, the gesture now familiar and comfortable. Thank you, Julian. For everything. He turned his head and pressed a kiss to my palm. You never have to thank me. Loving you isn't a favor. It's my privilege. The chain was not only broken. It had been melted down and reforged into something new and strong. We returned home after 6 months abroad. The city looked the same, but I was fundamentally different. The air didn't feel heavy with past grievances anymore. It was just air. We moved into a sun-drenched penthouse apartment that overlooked the river, a space that was entirely ours with no ghosts in the corners. Julian started taking a more active role in his family's business, not out of duty, but with a sharp, innovative mind that impressed even his formidable father. I, with the hard-won knowledge of my past life, began working with my father, using my understanding of future market trends and past pitfalls to guide the Vance Corporation into a new era of unprecedented success. I was no longer a decorative piece to be married off. I was a force in my own right. A year to the day after our engagement, we were married. It was not the society event of the century that my wedding to Cashin would have been. It was smaller, filled with genuine laughter and real love. My father walked me down the aisle, his eyes shining with pride, not for a successful alliance but for his daughter's happiness. When I saw Julian waiting for me at the end, his expression so full of awe and love it stole my breath, I knew this was the true path that had been waiting for me all along. The world I lived in had been a novel. I had been the villainess. But I had ripped out the final page and written my own ending. On our first anniversary, we hosted a dinner party at our home. The room was filled with the warm glow of candlelight and the sound of easy conversation. My parents were there, Julian's father was telling a hilarious story, and our closest friends, including a happily single Maya, were laughing along. Later that night, as we cleaned up, Julian wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Happy? He asked, his voice a soft rumble against my back. I leaned into his embrace, looking out at the glittering city lights. I thought of the cold hospital room, of Cashin's hate-filled screams, of the feeling of my life draining away. I thought of the fear, the strategy, the cold calculation of my second chance. And then I thought of this warmth, this peace, this unwavering love. More than I ever thought possible, I whispered, turning in his arms to face him. This is the life I was always meant to have. He kissed me, and it was a promise of a future we would build together, day by day, free from the shadows of the past. The story of the Villainess was over. My story, our story, was just beginning. And it was ours to write. The end.